a story brought to you exclusively by the Washington Examiner.
That's right.
Christian just had the opportunity to sit down with the man that moves markets in the good direction, not the bad one, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. And Christian, I have to ask you, fascinating to hear Treasury Secretary Bessent, after, taking a correct victory lap over one big beautiful bill, previewing what may be to come by saying, we may declare a national housing emergency, focusing not just on interest rates, which we'll get to in a moment, but also looking at affordability based on local regulation, different building codes in different areas, which we know zoning has to do with development. So tell me about this interview. What was the context of viewers? I know they can see the whole thing on washingtonexaminer.com, on our YouTube channels, but what were the highlights of this housing conversation you had?
Well, I was taken totally by surprise, Tiana, to be quite honest. And I would say this is a welcome announcement, or preview, I guess we should say. This is not set in stone, for folks on both sides of the aisle. Because let's be honest, we know economy runs everything in politics. And affordability is just a word that gets thrown out there. We heard it from Joe Biden. We've heard it from Donald Trump on some issues. But in reality, some of these policies haven't actually made it easier for people to buy groceries, fill up their car and go to work, and most importantly, secure shelter, whether it's purchasing a home or a condo or renting an apartment. And we have data that shows, shout out Freddie Mac, we have a 4 million unit housing shortage in this country. Yes, population, demographic shifts and immigration is a part of it, but we've got these big private equity firms, shout out BlackRock, coming in, buying up homes, buying up condos, pricing people out. And on top of that, the rising supply costs make new construction even harder. So I was very happy to hear Scott Bessent say that we want to tackle this next. It is non-political. There are a lot of questions up in the air about what will actually happen. But like you mentioned, they're examining ways to standardize building and zoning codes. They're obviously pressuring the Fed to lower interest rates. And I think most importantly, they are doing this in a way which doesn't, like Donald Trump has tried to do, flirting with some of these technology industries, doesn't nationalize all of these independent construction companies. So my question to you is, how does this square in with the president's push to lower interest rates, get Jerome Powell to finally announce cuts that we'll probably have them this month, and of course fire Lisa Cook?
So the interest rate conversation is sort of the chicken and the egg dynamic, where people have been trying to decide, is it the mortgages that are making the homes more affordable? I would argue no.
Yeah.
To a small extent, right? Entering a market where the baseline, average 30-year fixed mortgage is 6% rather than the 2021, as you and the Treasury Secretary are talking about.
That's right.
That we're never going back to a magical era of 1.5% mortgage rates. That is a barrier in terms of what your monthly payment is going to be. And it makes it so, of course, you can only have a house that's maybe, $100,000 cheaper. But on their own, interest rates are not the cause of the housing crisis, right? They're an effect because the interest rates stay high in order to temper demand. But again, it's just because we've built too little, because we have that 4 million person vacancy. So the last time the Federal Reserve cut interest rates, as we have talked about ad nauseum on this program, they cut by 100 basis points from September through December of last year. And in that time, the 30-year fixed mortgage actually increased by 100 basis points because it wasn't the housing market. There was still too much demand that was really independent of the mortgage rates. Because if you are having children or moving out of your parents' home, you need a new home. There's only so much you can shack up with new roommates or, live in your parents' basement until you're 35 years old. In the last year, from July 2024 to 2025, I was curious over the movement between home ownership versus renting. So the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate has declined about 3% in the last year. The Zillow Observed Rent Index is up almost 3%, which goes to show that this is, even if you give homeowners relief, it would not trickle down into renters.
Right.
So that's why the focus on supply side economics
is so important.
Yeah. And, by all indication, the Federal Reserve is gearing up to finally cut the federal funds rate in September, I think Trump is still acting within the confines of the Federal Reserve Act and going after Lisa Cook for cause, or what he says is cause, right? Like mortgage fraud is a real thing.
Well, on that note, I just want to cut in because we got an announcement from Bill Pulte at the White House Tuesday morning. They're actually raising a secondary criminal inquiry against Lisa Cook. He didn't give us details on this. So they are definitely zeroed in on her and her alleged wrongdoings and her alleged mortgage fraud.
Yeah, I mean, she's not someone I'm going to go to the mat for to say, like, this woman has incredible integrity, because we know with her academic record,
Yes,
it's
not like
it's
Dr. Manara at the CDC.
Yeah, so this is one where right now she hasn't actually denied what committing mortgage fraud, and like frankly, we should expect, like, mortgage fraud is one of those things that only rich people do, and they almost all get away with it, and we absolutely should be going after more white collar crime.
Agreed.
But the point is, Trump is still acting within the confines of the Federal Reserve Act. To get really wonky about the constitutional structure, Trump could be going after the Fed's independence entirely, right?
Yeah,
Challenging
we've talked about
it.
that before.
But he's not. He's operating within the confines of the Federal Reserve Act, saying, I'm only firing someone for cause. It might be a little tenuous, and we know the, greenback, US dollar doesn't love what's going on, but so far, treasuries are holding okay. They have faith with, okay, if the Fed cuts interest rates in September and Trump only is going after Lisa Cook for cause, we'll survive this. I think the administration's energy, because they are going to get what they want.
Yeah.
The Fed they're always too late. They were too late to increase in 2021, and they're too late to cut now. But the focus should be absolutely on the supply issue. And so it's this ongoing war with unilateral action versus work to codify law. One big, beautiful bill codified a bunch. With the housing stuff, you could see Bessent take the reins of the Senate housing bill that left the Senate Housing Committee. But what about the tariffs? Did you guys get to talk about the tariffs? Because constitutionally, again, right now you have a appellate court saying the IEEPA tariffs, so these are not the steel and aluminum, the specific sector tariffs, but broadly, we're tariffing everyone at least 10%.
You heard the word reciprocal. This is what we're talking about.
The reciprocal tariffs.
Exactly.
How did he explain away that, if at all?
Well, he didn't really, and I think it's interesting given this focus of Bessent's tour on Monday, on Labor Day. He was there at the McLean Family Restaurant in Northern Virginia, which is where I interviewed him, and then made stops at another diner in Northern Virginia, and then a local, long-standing restaurant in Georgetown in D.C. And he explicitly said, I only want to talk about no tax on tips. I only want to talk about no tax on overtime and no tax on, new car payments as long as you buy American. Because I think they're starting to feel the pressure, not only with these legal challenges of the tariffs themselves, which the Trump administration did suffer a loss last week. It will be appealed. They've got about a month to get the Supreme Court to take up the case. But on top of that, I think they're very worried about what the inflation data is going to look like for August, which will come after a potential rate cut from the Federal Reserve. But let's go back for a second. Let's look at the July numbers that came out in August. Both CPI and PCE came in either below expectations or right at them, which again, as these tariffs have started to be implemented, is surprising to most economists. And there's a number of factors there. Obviously, companies have decided, either because they have a backlog or because they're unsure of where this is actually going to go, not to pass on costs to consumers yet. But now that these full IEEPA tariffs are implemented, with the exception of China, as of the first week of August, those prices are going to go up.
So, like, the only country we actually should be tariffing the bejesus out of are mostly exempt.
Correct. And to your point, I tried to get the secretary to talk about the tariffs, but he dodged around the issue. And I just think for someone who has been essentially the fireman when it comes to trade fires for the Trump White House, as opposed to a Peter Navarro or as opposed to a Secretary Howard Lutnick, it caught me off guard a little bit because I had plenty of follow-ups, but he gave me nothing to work with. So what I see here is a slight distancing from this position. And again, it might be because they could be overturned in the judicial system. It might be because they're seeing data that we are not privy to yet,
Yeah.
and they're worried about it. But it's certainly something that if you've got these two legs of the Trump economic platform, and you knock one of the legs out, how's the stool going to stay up? And you've been talking about this in particular, and I've been talking about it too. But Tiana is an economist, so she knows more than I do. But it's basically what we were predicting, I want to say back in July, after we got the second pause on implementation. Is this actually going to happen? And at this point, I'm not so sure these are here to stay, like Peter Navarro and like Donald Trump himself have said they will be.
Just one of the grand ironies, and I know that the Treasury Secretary can't say this, but like every time he correctly boasts about the CapEx explosion, the investment we're getting in capital expenditures, the fact that we have money coming back into the country in the form of investment, that is literally the exact opposite of what would ideally happen if the tariffs were working, right? Because money has to go in some direction. If you're sending it out via consumers, it comes back in investment. And if you're keeping it in as consumers, it's not coming back in an investment. And frankly, we all know we'd much rather have the business investment than just more money spent at Walmart.
That's right.